I'm Will Carr, and I'm here to fire you up. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Will Carr Speaks podcast. In this episode, I sit down with Azuraye Wycoff of the Yellow Barn Farm here in Boulder, Colorado. This is a very interesting conversation that if you guys are interested in things like regenerative agriculture, industrial agriculture, the difference between the two, what it looks like to run an operation where you've got all types of different agricultural processes happening in the same place, and really to rethink the idea of what it means to be self-sustaining, to be sovereign around our own food supply, to be able to feed ourselves and take care of the community around us. This is going to be an episode that you are really going to enjoy. I had a great time sitting down and having this conversation. We even dive into certain things like legal structures around the way that farms operate. And I think if these are things that are as fascinating to you as they are to me, this is going to be an episode that you are really going to enjoy. So with that said, sit down, take a seat, relax, get a cup of coffee or an evening drink, depending on what time of day it is, and enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Will Carr Speaks podcast. I am, as I always am, I'm excited to be here, sit down, have another fun conversation with another really cool guest. Azuraye, is that how you pronounce it?
Azuraye.
Azuraye, wow. Should have asked you before we started recording. And then what's your last name?
Wycoff.
Wycoff, okay. Azuraye Wycoff.
Yeah.
So Azuraye, you manage the Yellow Barn Farm here in Boulder, and it's been a long family tradition of yours, correct?
Yeah, I think you could say that.
So several generations.
Yes, 2 generations.
Okay. And so how many years has your family had this farm?
Family bought the property in 2001, so I think that's 25 years now.
Okay. But you are in charge now.
I am in charge. Big responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me, how did that come to be? Because how old are you?
I am 34.
Okay. And you're in charge of this entire farming operation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I mean, so my parents bought the property in 2001, and it was an equestrian center called Autumn Hill.
Okay.
They ran it as an equestrian center for about 14 years. My sister and I got to grow up riding horses. It was an incredibly magical childhood. And then we moved away, kind of trying to run as far away from Boulder as possible. I ended up in China for quite some time and then landed in Boston. And then COVID happened and I just really felt a call to come home. And so I traveled home, got here in October 2020. And that is when the idea of Yellow Barn really started to come to life.
Yeah. So the concept of even calling it Yellow Barn, that was your idea?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It is a giant yellow barn.
Yeah, it is.
It seemed really fitting.
Yeah, if you drive just north of Boulder and just keep going, you can't miss it.
Exactly.
Like, it's right there.
On the side of the highway. People surprisingly miss it. And then you point out the yellow barn and they're like, wait a minute, I have passed that my entire life.
Yeah. Like, oh, that makes sense, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So before we started recording, you made the claim to me that you're not a farmer.
I am not a farmer.
Okay, but you run the Yellow Barn Farm.
I do.
So
but it's an operation.
Okay.
I am an operations and logistics and systems person.
Okay.
I do not get to claim the title of farmer. That is a very high honor of people who actually are tending the land and they're working with the living systems. So they are growing food, they are rotating cattle, tending pigs, really have their hands in the dirt. And my hands are often behind a computer.
Okay. So the reason you say you're not a farmer is because you're saying there are farmers at the farm that do the farming, but you're not physically doing the farming, so you don't claim that you're a farmer.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, I still think that you're a farmer. You're running you're running the operations of a farm.
That's true. Yes.
Well, tell me about those operations. Like you say, you're sitting behind a computer. Like often, what does that look like for you then? If you're not physically doing the farming, what does your role look like? Tell me in some like details, what is those operations?
Yeah. So the way I kind of think of it is in our farming systems, particularly regenerative agricultural systems, a lot of that is around how do you get water to slow sink and spread. So they might be utilizing the ditch that runs through the property, or having little ponds to store water and let that slow sink and spread, or building lateral channels that then go into where the trees are. I kind of do that for systems design. So making sure that the money knows where it needs to go, and that the information can flow, and that the people know who to talk to be in their right roles.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, but that's, you do more, because there's more happening on the farm all the time.
I definitely do more than
you just gave me a really short description.
Yes, you said a few words.
But
so
I know, but I
succinct.
know there's a lot more. So tell me more. I want to know more. Like, give me the full explanation.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this is gonna take a little longer.
That's fine. We've got a whole hour. We're doing a podcast.
Yeah. All right. So I'd say really what I hold is understanding the entire complex ecosystem that is Yellow Barn. So Yellow Barn is a 100-acre property. So I think of this as the central container. And then within that container, we have a completely decentralized operation. So there are multiple tenants that live on the property. There are businesses that operate on the property, many of which me and or my business partner own collectively. There are events that are happening. There's organizations that are tending the land, nonprofits that are doing work. There is so much activity. And so my role is really helping define, how are all of these parties operating within the same sandbox? How do we make sure that everyone knows where their designated zone is? And when we have these zones of overlap, what we call the ecotones, where those jurisdictions on the property start to bleed together and creating that boundary line, I am the one that's creating the contracts and the agreements to make sure that that can line up together. And then it's operating. So I manage all of the logistics. We have about 6 businesses that we own and operate, Yellow Barn being one of them. So that's like property management. That is events, so weddings and private events, retreats, community engagement. That is a moving company called Small Haul Movers. I do all of the back end quoting, booking, logistics for all of our crews. And then we have a landscaping company called Kaizen. We have a compost business called Picky Pig. So we send out trucks.
Good name.
Exactly. Throughout the community, and we pick up food waste and we bring it back to the farm, and we either feed pigs or we sort it and filter it into compost piles that are building soil that goes back into gardens or for tree plantings or back to the community. We have a online platform called the Stock Market, like corn stock market. That is a CSA marketplace. So people can buy beef shares or pork shares, eggs, veggies, and they buy in bulk so that they can then eat that throughout the course of the year. And we handle all of the storage and the distribution, so they can request what we call a dividend of their share whenever they want it. And we have a handyman service called Handy Jobs. That's really Charles, and a little tongue-in-cheek innuendo. And we just operate all of these different businesses that are really based out of vans. So we kind of think of it as like entrepreneurship. Like if you could put a business in a van, we will do it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, there are, you talked about the different businesses and stuff that you guys are running out of it, but you rent, of these 100 acres, you have several different groups of farmers that come in and kind of do their own thing on certain plots of the land.
So the primary organization is Drylands Agroecology Research, or DAR for short, and they are our primary stewardship partners. They're a nonprofit that have been doing the master plan with us since year one. They have helped us plant close to 8,000 trees on the property. They rotate their cattle, and they have pigs, and they're doing a perennial garden. So they are the primary organization that's there.
Yeah.
They have a partnership with Sunburn Farms. So we have Sunburn Farms planting chickpeas and potatoes on the farm, as well as we help sell all of their produce shares through the stock market. Then we have our own little area called the Sovereignty Gardens, which was kind of an homage to the Victory Gardens back in the 40s. So more community garden plot style, where there are 10 people that have plots within this garden area that we've helped build soil for the last couple of years. And it's more a showcase and a demonstration of different gardening tactics and systems. And that might look like herbs, veggies, flowers, anything that they're interested in growing.
Yeah. And so like with the compost business, is most of that used back on the farm, or
Mhm.
are people taking that offsite?
First year of building compost, everything's going to go back on the farm.
Okay.
It would be a dream that eventually at one point we get
You
like
had so
an
much.
inch worth of compost over the entire 100 acres.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be the goal.
Okay, so that's the goal, is to really just coat the entire 100 acres with
Yeah,
fresh compost.
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, living soil.
Yeah. And are you picking that up mostly in Boulder, or are you going further out?
Yeah, Boulder County. Yeah, so all of
Okay.
Boulder County. So Longmont, Lyons, Boulder, Superior, Lafayette, Louisville. And we have really cool partnerships that we've been growing. We work with all the Moxie locations. We work with
Okay.
Nude Foods. We work with an organization called BioGreen. That's been
Mm.
really amazing. And they work with a lot of the big hotel chains.
Mm.
And they create a slurry of compost material. And we help them with the last mile distribution of just getting it back to the farm. And that has been a major way to actually save water because it's all in just liquid form.
Yeah.
So finding all these little ways that we can take in waste material. I mean, even Kaizen, the landscaping company, has yard debris that we bring back and we turn that into compost. And so everything we're doing is really taking a regenerative focus. So Kaizen doing more eco and regenerative landscaping tactics, using compost tea instead of chemical fertilizer, so that we know when we take all the yard clippings, it doesn't have any chemicals on it. And we're building that into compost systems.
Mm.
Yeah.
How hard is it to make sure that nothing that you're bringing in has chemicals on it?
It's hard.
I would think, especially, there's people are eating whatever they're eating at their home, and then they're wanting to compost, right? And you don't necessarily, there's not like a way you can really verify that.
We try really hard to educate people and teach people that what you're putting in your body is ultimately what goes into the waste streams. And obviously, we all want to put the best quality food we can. The world at large doesn't really allow us to do that in an easy way right now.
But we are in a really cool bubble here in Boulder.
Yeah. Boulder's really unique for this. And I think we're really fortunate that people are very health conscious. But our ultimate goal is saying you should be eating from the farm. So that way all your waste material is stuff that already was coming from the farm. And we can just bring that back and close the loop. So creating the stock market, creating Picky Pig. Picky Pig is more of like a courier service. If small haul is like slightly larger moves, Picky Pig, sometimes people are calling it Piggy Posts, which I'm kind of playing around with that idea. Being more like courier one item things that need to get moved around. Okay. And then the waste is really Picky Pig. And so having this funnel where everything can come back to the farm, then it kind of eliminates the idea of waste. There's no such thing as waste in our mind. Everything is just a byproduct for some other input of a system that needed that. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, there's so much, we're talking about compost being mostly, plant material, but there's so many things. Like, for example, you talk about waste. It makes me think of, my protein bars being made with bison tallow. Like tallow in general is such a product that has just been thrown away for so long. Right. And then now there's like this resurgence of tallow that's being used. And I'm sure you guys have tallow on the farm as well, with your beef shares and stuff. Yeah. And, but there's literally everything from the animal, everything from the plant can not only just be used, but then the byproducts and the excess products can be used in some way or another too. Yeah. And that's probably something that's so good with like the pigs, because pigs will eat anything you give them. Yeah. I mean, we got to be careful with that because they really will eat anything. Really will, yeah. But funny enough, actually, the pigs are a little bit picky, which is where that name came from. It's like they'll eat close to anything, but they won't eat things like nightshades. A lot of like peppers and tomatoes give them like an upset stomach. They won't eat a lot of citrus. So we really try to avoid having like a giant, if someone, a grocery store was making fresh pressed orange juice. Right. We couldn't take like an entire bin worth of orange peels. They won't eat like avocado pits and shells. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of things that pigs won't eat. Man. Which is kind of funny because people think that they really will eat anything. And they are voracious eaters. And the beauty of this system is that we really can give them quite a lot of organic material and they will digest that. And they're creating fertilizer through their manure. So they are like microbiodigesters, essentially, where they're digesting everything. It becomes manure that gets turned and rolled into the soil over time. And you're getting a ton of fertility in a really easy way. So you move them around a decent amount? Yeah. Interesting. So I'd say that's a really big piece of regenerative agriculture is you are not having animals for the sole intention of creating a food product.
Mm-hmm.
You have animals because they're providing a service.
Yeah.
They're one of the tools in your tool belt to have different results come from the land.
Mm-hmm.
And regenerative agriculture is really focused on soil health.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the primary service that they're offering is. So we kind of think of it as like soil as a service.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pigs are moving around, the cattle are moving around, the chickens are moving around. You don't want to keep anything in one place for too long because it starts to degrade the land.
Mm-hmm. Only in Boulder, Colorado do we have bougie pigs.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, this is how animals should be managed.
Yeah.
It's because we don't manage animals in this way, which is like the most natural and holistic way. If you think of animals out in the wild.
Yeah.
They're never going to just sit still.
Yeah.
They're
move. Never in confinement.
No, never in confinement. I mean, if you think about like feedlots and stuff, and we're keeping all of our animals in one place, they're defecating in that same place, and they're eating in that same place, and they're getting infections in those same places. And that's the quality of food that we're ingesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you really give animals free reign to roam, but you kind of mimic what like the migratory buffalo were doing back in the day, is that they had predation where it would have them group in a small herd to be really compact, and then they'd move around, but they would stamp into their urine and their manure, and then they would leave that area for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have a ton of fertility in that zone, and then they wouldn't come back for at least a season usually. And so we do that. We're mimicking that pattern with cattle, rotating through different areas on pasture. And then we let land rest. So they're eating, they're dropping their manure, they're rotating, and then they come back maybe another time in the season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so cool because I grew up on a very much like an industrial farm, in the Midwest where, we didn't personally have livestock. So we didn't personally have like cows or pigs or chickens or any of that. But a lot of people around us did. And it was definitely much more the confinement, always one spot, there's a barn and there's the fence and that's where they're at always. And then even to extend on that, it's very much the Monsanto corn and soybeans and wheat type of model that has existed over the last several decades. And there is this movement away from that, obviously. And there's a whole movement of people who are, we're buying organic foods and we're not ingesting things that we know have glyphosate in them, which unfortunately that chemical spreads, once it's on something, it is, you can't get it off. So, it's interesting to me, and it's fun for me to hear you talk about this new type of, and it's not new really, it's going back to the way things used to be prior to the industrialization of farming, and doing things in a way that's much more sustainable and actually provides food for people that is healthy and provides for a much more suitable environment to thrive. And so, I don't know really where I was going with that other than the fact I love seeing the contrast. And it's fun to me to talk about the contrast because, my upbringing, although a wonderful way to grow up, very wholesome, like family, farming type community. It's fun to see that there's this movement towards, and you guys are really spearheading that. So congrats to you guys. And it's just cool that you guys are setting that example, and showing people that it can be done, because 100 acres is a lot of land, and these industrial farms are, getting them in the thousands and tens of thousands of acres. But if we can show that it can be done on 100 acres, if it can be done on 100 acres, it can be done on 100,000 acres, right?
Yeah.
And then even beyond.
Yep.
So what do you, and I'll preface this by saying, I know you probably don't have much experience with the industrial type farming, but what are like some ways that you see that like you would like to see? Let me put it this way. In like a utopia type world, like what is your vision for how we could have a resurgence of the type of farming that you have, that you're doing, this regenerative farming? where the world can move away from these new old systems that we don't necessarily want to see so much anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that was such a good framing of just like the fact that you got such a magical childhood too, just being able to be on land. And I think a lot of people nowadays don't even get that. And I think getting to hear your perspective of growing up, but also observing kind of what the food system looks like today. And that tends to look like a lot of monocropping. It tends to look like having animals over here, crops over here, using chemicals to manage everything, and using big, big machinery in order to manage the whole system. And I think that's one way to do it. And I think it's really gotten us to a level of growth in society that we really needed. We needed to solve our problem.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of people we had to feed. And these were really good tools and tactics to manage that growing issue. But where it's gotten us now is that we're really starting to bankrupt our soil because the soil is not getting enough biodiversity. It's being coated with chemicals. It's not having a natural rotation in its life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you get to a point eventually where your soil can't actually grow anything. There's nothing left. It's not alive anymore. It's just dirt.
Yeah.
And the more that we do that, the less nutritional value our food has.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we have to use geoengineering and pesticides and herbicides and all these different tactics in order to keep it alive.
And adding things like nitrogen and ammonia.
Exactly. All the fertilizers that we have to import. And especially with the world where we're at right now, that fertilizer is going to be a lot harder to get.
Totally. And that's a topic. I don't want to take you off your train of thought, but like, because I loved where you were going with all that. But yeah, this is something that, I didn't think about this prior to our conversation, but with everything that's happening in the world right now and the Strait of Hormuz being closed and the war between Russia and Ukraine, where between those two things specifically, that is a large majority of where the fertilizer of the world comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely could run into issues. Right now, planting season has started. My father and uncle have been out in the field. They're probably a third of the way through planting their corn and soybeans.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the ammonia and the nitrogen and all the stuff that they needed for this year. But coming into next season, that's something that there could be massive shortages for. And people might not have a choice but to try to go a different route.
And I think that's what we've been preparing for.
Yeah.
And I think we all saw it during COVID where global systems just started to collapse really rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't food on the shelves in grocery stores. And we're so used to a level of convenience and rapid gratification that it's really surprising when something like that breaks down, or we don't actually think that that could really even be a possibility. So we're not really planning for that. Or if you are, you're considered a prepper.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I'd rather kind of be prepared for the potential of something happening and just be, comfortable that it didn't. But I think everything we're designing for, really at like the foundation of what Yellow Barn is emergency preparedness.
Mm.
How do we ensure that we have created enough stability in all of the systems that we've designed for so that if something were to go down, we would be okay. And we would be kind of a safety net for a local community.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone in Boulder County, but we can definitely support, around at least 150 households.
Oh, cool.
So that's always been kind of the baseline goal. Is how do we really prepare for something like that?
Mm-hmm.
But kind of what you're talking about is we're going to see a really big lagging effect that is going to increase the price of crops, the price of hay, which we're already seeing, the price of meat. You're going to see all of those things happen over like the next 6 to 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something we've really been thinking about is how do you actually help people prepare for what they don't actually think is ever going to be an issue?
Right.
And that's kind of been the premise behind the stock market was, buy your whole cow now and make it inflation proof to pricing changes that are coming down the line. And you don't necessarily have to pick up an entire cow and store it yourself. We'll store it for you. But you just tell us when you want it.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge way where we started to shift the economic structure and the cash flow for farmers, where usually farmers are raising their cattle, growing their crop, and then picking all of it, processing everything, and then going to a market to sell everything in hopes that they've created enough supply to meet demand or vice versa. And so what we're trying to do is say, community, what do you want? How many of you actually want X, Y, and Z? We'll take that information, we'll relay it to your farmers, and then they know exactly how much to plant, how many animals to raise, how many to process. And then we store everything, and people tell us when they want a portion of what they've already prepaid for. So that was a huge game changer in the way that we've been designing this, because the last 5 years we've been doing it the other way. And it has been a constant game of chasing your tail. And we never really had the right quantities. It was always really confusing. I dealt with all the logistics for people trying to come pick up half a pig or a whole cow. And that's a lot of meat. And it's really hard to move all of that all at once. So over the last 5 years, we've really tried to simplify everything. And kind of circling back to, what we were initially talking about, kind of talking about the monocropping and what I'd like to eventually see for larger scale farmers.
Yeah. Way to bring it full circle.
Yeah. Is this idea of how do you actually holistically integrate everything?
Yeah.
How do you get every person in the supply chain to actually play their specific role, but do it in a micro scale so that you don't necessarily have to create such a ridiculous economy of scale in order to get a margin that would allow you to survive? And a lot of farmers barely even pay themselves. Like they're mostly paying off the cost of their tractors and their seeds and their chemical productions and all of that kind of stuff. And because everything is super siloed, you're actually losing out on the benefit of integrating everything. All of these systems actually want to interoperate. That's what nature is designed for, is that the fertility from the cows is a loss for what you're actually having to supplement in terms of your phosphorus and ammonia and nitrogen. These are things, they're inputs that you don't actually really need if you're working with soil in a way that is really holistic and integrated. Organic matter naturally is going to want to compost. If you put all those inputs together, if you rotate animals through your pastures and your hay fields, if you're using cover crops to actually regenerate the nutrients in the actual soil, you're trying to create a microbiology of living soil. And that living soil self-heals. It regenerates. It actually it sequesters carbon much more effectively. It retains water in the soil. You don't have to supplement it so much with all of these other things. It has a natural resistance to pests. You're creating an entire living ecosystem that is actually self-calibrating. So you just start working with nature rather than trying to control it and dominate it. And then nature works with you and it becomes so much more abundant. Then we're not trying to manufacture abundance because you have to create so much more volume in order for the margins, in order to get any kind of nutritional value. Most of the food that we're eating in the grocery stores is not actually making us well. It's making us sick, and it's putting us back into a medical system that is already selling you the drugs that they were putting on the things that were making you sick in the first place. So we're trying to just break that cycle. And it's on a small scale right now to be a demonstration of what could be.
Yeah.
But there's a big transition that would have to happen for larger scale agriculturalists, that they have a process and a system that is very much embedded, and it's just the way it always has been. And trying to change that, your margins are so slim with farming that you can't actually take that much risk.
Right.
And you have to create a parallel path. I would never recommend to a large scale farmer to just change everything in one season. You do it slowly, and you do it like section by section. Or maybe instead of planting your entire field with just corn or just soybean or just wheat, you would let a section rest and you would plant cover crops. So you start repairing that natural soil. And then you might bring pigs through, your hogs. Instead of having them all over here, bring your hogs through, and they're going to clear your cover crops, and they're going to fertilize as they go. And then you can plant. Or you bring chickens through after that. There's a whole methodology with the way that you get all these animals to work together that starts bringing soil back to life, that also doesn't take up as much space. You need twice as much acreage pretty much to have your pigs over here and your crops over here. Whereas you could use the same amount of acreage and you'd be rotating your pigs or your cattle through, planting cover crop, and then coming behind to plant your crop. Yeah.
I think I saw something the other day that like one cow will feed a family of 4 for a year. Is that? Obviously,
100%.
Not me.
Yeah, maybe 2 cows for you.
Maybe 2 cows for me. I need 1 cow for myself and the other cow for the family. But that's pretty wild to think that, I think we overthink what it takes to feed ourselves. That if 1 cow can sustain a normal sized family of 4 people, that's really affordable. It's not something that is going to, the concept of this could really actually save people money.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about how often you go to the grocery store. And every time you go to the grocery store, I'm guessing maybe every 2 weeks or so,
Yeah.
and you're buying a couple cuts of meat.
Yeah.
And that meat has a pretty extensive markup. And every single one of those cuts is going to be a different weight and a different price per pound,
Yeah.
depending on the cut. You are spending probably 20 to 30% more, not even accounting for all of your time going to the grocery store, if you value your time like that, over the course of an entire year. Whereas if you bought a whole cow, you're getting that entire animal in weight, which is around 400 pounds worth of meat, at one fixed price per pound, regardless of cut. And that actually simplifies the logistics on our end so that we're not trying to figure out every single cut that, you might have 4 T-bone steaks, let's just say.
Yeah.
And every single one of those steaks is going to be a different weight, and they're all going to be a higher price per pound. But that means that's a ton more tracking for us on the inventory side and the logistics and management. So what we've just said is that, great, you're buying 400 pounds. Every time you call or you request a dividend of your share, you're going to get a 25-pound butcher box of mixed cuts of beef. That way, you don't really have to think, and we don't have to think, and everything's been pre-packaged in 25-pound butcher boxes. So you're over the course of the year, you're going to request all your 25-pound butcher boxes, and you're going to get the equivalent of an entire cow worth of beef at a fixed price, so that you're paying less per pound overall, and you're saving that 20 to 30% over the course of the year. I mean, let's make that 40% on cost for your time that you otherwise could have been spending doing something else.
So I assume you guys have everything on the farm: chickens, eggs, bacon. You can get it all. And that's
Pretty
what the
much.
stock exchange you're talking about
Yeah,
is for,
exactly.
really.
Yeah. And if you can't get it off of our farm, we're partnering with other farms. And so we've become like a micro food hub where we work with Croft family farms for all of their eggs. And they're coming from like Berthoud area, which is pretty far for them to travel. And they have a lot of drop-offs like Nude Foods and River and Woods, and they'll come into town and they'll drop off, probably 200 dozen worth of eggs once a week, but they're spending at least 3 hours on that delivery branch, which is very expensive time for a farmer.
Yeah.
And so what we just said is, hey, why don't you sell your eggs through the stock market with us so people can buy a share of eggs for themselves? And then when you come to drop off those eggs, why don't you just drop off all of the eggs that need to go out, and we'll help you with the last mile distribution. And we charge like $10 a stop. Yeah. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. And so once a week, they just drop off in our little micro warehouse on the farm. We package everything up. We put it into our van the next day, and then we do the delivery. Yeah.
Man, what a great service for people. Like, how many, you said you serve about 150 or so households?
Yeah. We're scaling into 150.
Okay.
And we know that that's going to be our max capacity. Once we hit 100.
At the current farm size, like you would have to expand beyond.
We would have to replicate to another node in the network. So Yellow Barn itself is going to be able to handle about 150 households. And then we would probably replicate out to another node and recreate the entire system. And the goal is to create a mycelial network. That meaning this idea of what Yellow Barn is not necessarily making another Yellow Barn. It's taking the pattern of that concept and then replicating that in maybe Denver and then Fort Collins, and then connecting all of the nodes, which might be like a Nude Food size grocery market, and then nooks, which are like residential homes. We do this with the egg drop, where we'll drop off 2 coolers worth of eggs at someone's home, and then a bunch of people come and pick up eggs from that location. So you've got your hubs, your nodes, and your nooks. And if we can create this mycelial network that is replicating horizontally rather than trying to create vertical exponential growth, which is not natural in nature, and it's like a virus, then we actually have local stability that looks more like a web rather than like a giant game of Jenga. And you take the same concepts, the same patterns, you can change around the names of the different hubs. And then ideally, we take all of the little business entities that we've created and we create replication of branches for them as well, where the structure's already there, the software's already in place, the pricing mechanism's already there, and you just plop a truck in all of these different farm nodes, hubs, and then they suddenly have economic stability because now all those businesses are paying rent to the farm.
And I imagine it's not like, because like one challenge I could see with replicating this in certain areas is, I think about my family farm where I grew up, and just say that, they wanted to break off 100 acres and start doing something like this. The problem would be that they're completely surrounded by all the industrial farming where all these other chemicals and glyphosate and everything is being sprayed.
Yeah.
And so that would, in my mind, contaminate that 100 acres, even though they weren't using those chemicals on that particular 100 acres. So it's like you don't have that problem at the yellow farm. There's not industrial farming surrounding you. And I guess these other nodes, there wouldn't be industrial farms surrounding them either. Mm. And I would think that would be one of the key issues in really getting this to be able to spread, is that someone could try to do something like this in a more industrial farming area, but unless you had enough people to really start doing it, it wouldn't work, because the water flow and the contamination would be, it would cover those spots. Like it wouldn't just stay, it's not like there's not like an invisible barrier,
No, you're 100% right. And I think that's something we've really acknowledged for ourselves, is that this isn't going to work everywhere right now. Mm-hmm. This is something that you find the right locations to put it, to get the concept up and running. And you create densification over time as mindsets start to shift. Mm-hmm. And I see that being like a 10 to 20, 30, multi-generational process. Yeah. That's not something that's going to happen in the next couple of years.
Right.
And there has to be such an obvious benefit for farmers, and usually some sort of economic shift, that it doesn't make sense for them to produce food in this way any longer. Mm-hmm. They're not going to just do it out of altruism.
Right.
So that's probably not the market that we'd be starting with, because the resistance is too high.
Yeah.
And you would truly need a collective shift at probably a national or a global level for things to move in a different direction. So we let that play out in that sector on its own time. That's not the area that we're trying to affect change in. I think there are organizations like Mad Agriculture that is working more at that large scale. They're much more positioned to do things like that. Things that we're working on, I mean, we're kind of following the trail of all the locations that we've put a small haul moving company. Mm-hmm. And those are in big major cities right now. And we know, okay, there's now an operating business that has good cash flow. Now we could take something like a Yellow Barn and find another location like right outside of Boston, Massachusetts, that would allow us to kind of replicate the same system and practice in another state. And then you do it again in all of the different locations that we have a small haul, where now small haul can base its operations out of this farm. We get the thing up and running. We start maybe bringing in a Kaizen, then we bring a Picky Pig and a stock market, and you build up all the same infrastructure. That would be the initial way that I would roll out something like this. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, I'm kind of looking at two opposite ends of the spectrum, where you've got extreme how it is right now versus extreme on the other side doing regenerative agriculture, and they're all going to slowly meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. And once they do that, then we can actually start to shift things. But that's a long time.
Yeah. And what a great example too of, I just think, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, kind of along these lines of, you can only do what you can do. And then the rest is a degree of having faith. Yep. And just like trusting God, trusting the divine, trusting that the things that are bigger than you, and the things that the battles that are too big for us to fight are being fought in some like spiritual realm that like, it's like, even though we can't necessarily take that on our shoulders, that we just trust that process is going to happen, that we just trust that progress is going to happen. And how cool that you are able to do this on the scale that you're able to do it, and really start to show that it can be done on a larger scale. Yeah. But that, 100 acres is a great, incredible place to start,
Yeah, exactly.
And it probably feels very rewarding. Like, I'm sure you wake up every day really just excited and feeling like you get to feel good about what you do.
Yeah, that is so very true. I think about the direction my life could have taken on so many different forks in the road, and the fact that I ended up doing what I'm doing now is wild, because it's nowhere close to where I thought I was going to be. But I know that every experience I had was actually preparing me to do this specifically.
Yeah.
And I think the goal is making it a place where all skill types have a role to play because everyone's going to want to participate in moving the ball forward in this way. So the more ways that you can create economic diversity means that everyone who's got a unique skill set can actually participate. And then you just figure out how do you replicate again and again in these different areas so that more people can participate and contribute to that movement. Kind of like what you were just saying is like, I have a lot of faith that there is a greater organizational process that is happening. And I very much subscribe to the idea of just like quantum physics is working on detangling everything.
Yeah.
And it's all moving at the speed it needs to move. And we literally needed to go through this process of massive extraction and all the things that are playing out to get the world where it is. I mean, like, look at a space like this. Like, look at these cameras and the lights and everything. Like, this had to get created. And that's a very masculine, yang, energetic that created and produced. And we're starting to see the tides shift a little bit where now it's coming into, okay, we have a lot of stuff. How do we organize all this stuff now? Where does everything actually belong? And how do we actually start to nourish and start to tend things and steward things? And so I think it's all starting to come back full circle. And it's a lot of just like the magnetism. You know, if someone's really starting to do their work and starting to regulate their nervous system, they're pulling themselves like out of this inverted energetic where it's just sucking in energy and kind of vampiric, which is what I think a lot of the world has gotten to right now. Is we're just pulling and pulling and pulling. And it's a black hole of energy. But if you can start to reverse that polarity where you're actually creating a generative force and you're in an environment that's creating a regenerative force, you start to create that as a magnetic field around your person, your community, and abundance just tends to flow from things like that.
Yeah. Amen to that.
That's what we're trying to create. These little hubs or these little vortexes of positive, energetic abundance.
Yeah. Well, this has been super fun. We've got a few more minutes left. I want to kind of finish. I'm going to take a kind of a right turn here. I want to talk about something just for a few minutes before we wrap up. Do you mind talking to me a little bit about the legal structure of your guys' farm? Because I feel like this is something we could do an entire other podcast on.
Sure could.
But, you know, let's try to think, 5-7 minutes. How do we, give me a little bit of just like a brief rundown of the legal structure? Because I think it's really, really interesting. And I think 5 to 7 minutes probably means we're gonna have to schedule another one to just talk about this because I'm gonna have a lot of questions. Yeah, I'll just let you start. Like, kind of tell me a little bit about the legal structure of the farm.
How do I describe this without compromising myself? Is the big thing. I think a really big way that we've structured this is to decentralize risk.
Yeah,
that's the primary goal. Is that all of the different businesses have their own operating entities and they all transact with each other. And the goal is to keep money moving as much as possible within the ecosystems. And then really Yellow Barn itself is a property management company. We are not a farming operation. We manage the property so that everyone can do what they do best.
Yeah.
So that the farmers can farm and so that we can host events and we can have our tenants. And then at the heart of it all, and really this kind of developed really organically, and it was more of just like a response to what was coming up in the ecosystem. But we ultimately created a 501c3 or 508c1a church nonprofit that we call the Earth Church.
Yeah.
And we think of that bank account as the seed bank.
Yeah.
And so community contributes to the seed bank that allows us to then fund regenerative food hub infrastructure. If we need to get a walk-in cooler so that we can take in more eggs and produce, funds would go towards something like that. A root cellar, emergency preparedness. If the grid goes down, how do we create some sort of battery backup solar power engine? And this entity has been really important in the ecosystem in terms of creating a unified ethos. That the work that we're doing is meant to be stewardship in service to land. That's the core philosophy that binds all of it together. I'm saying nature always has a seat at the table when we make decisions, the primary seat at the table. The land is our cathedral. So everything we do is tending this cathedral, making it better, cleaning up after ourselves, improving the infrastructure, and that there's no intermediary between you and source.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a priest or someone who's saying, you have to go through me for confession in order to connect to spirit. It's for you to reestablish your connection with the divine. And that really is through taking care of Pachamama. This is through the work that is on the land. If you have confession, let's say, go tell the land. Go sit with the stones and the river and the earth and tell her what it is that's on your heart. And that has been such a big mindset shift where it really takes us out of this idea of extraction and puts us into a place of reverence.
Yeah.
And I think
Communion.
we've lost a lot of that over. Yeah. And I think even just for myself, I think a lot of us feel that now is that many of us don't really resonate with big religion.
Yeah.
It might be an upbringing that a lot of us came from or is very much within our own ecosystems and fabric, but something in that didn't really sit right. And that extreme spirituality maybe doesn't totally sit right either. It's something in the middle that's embodied and it's grounded and it's coming from a place of service that gives us purpose. And it's that idea of, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Yeah.
Everything is just an act of service. And you're shifting your mindset that idea of connection doesn't put you above anyone else. It doesn't make you special. You are a part of a fabric and an ecosystem, and you play a role. And it's just understanding that your role is important. Everything you do matters. It gives you a sense of purpose, and it makes sense out of a world that feels increasingly complex and devoid of hope in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say you gave a wonderful answer there without really answering the question. But what I'll say is I think that the system that we currently live in, whether it be the way the majority of farming is done, or whether it be the way that, people are consumers and the way that people typically find their outlets to spend their time, or like regardless of whatever it is, the typical system of the way that people live and what people are living in is something that doesn't have to be the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we can separate ourselves from the system, create a decentralized network, not just of farming, but really of every aspect that touches our life, to be able to regain our sovereignty is something that needs to be talked about more. It's something that people need to go down the rabbit hole of more, and really, because what really matters is it's this idea of critical mass.
Mm-hmm.
Once enough people can start to exit the old system and really enter into this new system, I think that lots of magic can happen. Not just a new way of farming, but like an entire new way of society existing. And so, there's a million more questions we could talk about with that, but I think that's where we'll leave it. So thank you so much for coming on. And I've really loved this conversation. This has been so fun. And I look forward to having more conversations with you, and I'm excited to call you new friends. So
likewise. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Good organic conversation.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, thanks so much, and we'll chat soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I'm Will Carr, and I'm here to fire you up.